All right, let's get into it. We are about to unpack the detective story behind one of the most powerful and, really elegant ideas in all of science, the theory of evolution. It's an incredible story full of clues, a few wrong turns, and some absolutely brilliant breakthroughs that completely changed how we see everything, including ourselves.
So our story really kicks off with a puzzle that totally captivated a young naturalist named Charles Darwin. He was looking at creatures just like these finches on the Galapagos Islands. And you can see they're clearly all finches, but on each island they had slightly different beaks, almost perfectly designed for whatever food was available there. So the big question was, how? How do you explain this incredible, fine-tuned diversity of life?
Now, to really appreciate just how revolutionary Darwin's idea was, we've got to do a little time travel. We need to see the world the way people did before him. And their world, well, it was basically seen as fixed, set in stone.
For centuries, a big chunk of Western thought was shaped by this idea from Plato called essentialism. The basic idea was that for every living thing, there exists some kind of perfect, ideal form of it out there. So any actual dog you see is just a flawed copy of a perfect, eternal dogginess. In that view, the little differences between dogs aren't interesting. They're just mistakes, imperfections.
So if you were an essentialist looking at these finches, you wouldn't see a branching family tree at all. Nope. You'd see a collection of totally separate, distinct types. The warbler finch is one thing, the ground finch is another, and there was this uncrossable gap between them. They weren't cousins, they were completely different categories of being.
And this whole worldview was neatly organized into something called the Great Chain of Being. Just picture a single cosmic ladder. At the very bottom, you've got your simplest life forms. Then you climb up through plants, animals, then humans who got a pretty special spot, then angels, and right at the top, God. And here's the key. Everything had its place, and that place was fixed.
But then, around the 18th and 19th centuries, scientists started digging up clues that just didn't fit. They didn't fit into this nice, neat, fixed picture of the world. And that's when the first cracks in that old worldview really started to show.
So, what were these clues? Well, first, geologists like Georges Cuvier were finding fossils of these bizarre creatures that just didn't exist anymore. This suggested species could actually go extinct, which was a huge deal. Then you had Charles Lyell arguing that the Earth itself wasn't young, but incredibly old, and was shaped by super slow, gradual processes. This meant there was a ton of time for things to change. And then the big one. Jean-Baptiste Lamarck came along and said, hey, maybe species aren't fixed at all. Maybe they can actually transform. Lamarck's idea was a massive step forward. He basically proposed that an organism could change based on what it did. If it used an organ a lot, it would get bigger and stronger. If it didn't use it, it would shrink. And he argued these changes that an animal acquired during its life could be passed on to its kids. It's a really intuitive idea, but as we'll see, it was missing the key mechanism. And that brings us to the main characters of our story, Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace. These were the guys who, working independently, finally cracked the case. They figured out the central mystery of how life actually changes. To really get what they figured out, let's look at a classic puzzle from the animal kingdom. How in the world did the panda get its thumb? The crazy thing is, a panda's thumb isn't a thumb at all. It's actually a wrist bone that's just kind of grown out. It's a brilliant makeshift solution that helps the panda grip bamboo, which is pretty much all it eats. So how did a strange but useful thing like this even come to be? Okay, here's where we see the huge difference between the two ideas. Lamarck might have said that ancient pandas were constantly straining their wrists to hold bamboo, and that effort made the wrist bone get a little longer. Then they'd pass that slightly longer bone on to their babies. It's all about individual change. Darwin's idea was completely different. He said the secret isn't transformation, it's variation. He said you start with a whole population of pandas, where, just by random chance, some have slightly longer wrist bones than others. Darwin's whole theory of natural selection really boils down to three simple but incredibly powerful observations. 1, there's variation in any group. No two are exactly alike. 2, those variations can be passed down from parents to kids. And 3, because of that variation, some individuals will just happen to be a little better suited to their environment. They survive more, they have more kids, and their useful traits get passed on more often. That's it. It's not the individual that changes, it's the makeup of the whole population that shifts over generations. And this brings us to that famous phrase, survival of the fittest, which a lot of people get wrong. Fitness, in Darwin's world, has nothing to do with being the strongest or fastest. It's all about one thing, reproductive success. This quote just nails it. An Olympic athlete could be at the peak of human conditioning, but if they don't have kids, their fitness is zero in evolutionary terms. Meanwhile, the composer J.S. Bach, well, he had 20 kids. Now that is some serious Darwinian fitness.
But there was a huge, gaping hole in Darwin's theory, a piece of the puzzle he just could not figure out. He knew traits were passed down, but he had absolutely no idea how, and this was a major problem.
See, the common idea back then was something called blending inheritance. People thought traits from parents just blended together in their offspring, kind of like mixing black and white paint to get gray. And if you think about it, that's a huge problem for Darwin's theory. If a new useful trait popped up, it would just get diluted by half in the next generation, and then a quarter, and pretty soon, poof, it would just vanish from the population.
And the solution, amazingly, was being worked out during Darwin's own lifetime by a monk named Gregor Mendel. He was working quietly in a monastery garden, doing thousands and thousands of experiments with pea plants. And what he found was that traits don't blend at all. Mendel's smoking gun was a number, 3 to 1. When he'd cross, say, a tall pea plant with a short one, the short trait would seem to disappear in the first generation. But then, it would pop right back up in the second generation and always in this consistent 3 to 1 ratio. This could only mean one thing. The instructions for these traits, what we now call genes, were like separate, discrete particles. The short plant trait wasn't blended away, it was just hiding, ready to show up again. Traits weren't like paint, they were like marbles.
Mendel's work was the final, critical piece of the puzzle. When his work was rediscovered years later and fused with Darwin's theory, it created what we call the modern synthesis. This is the incredibly powerful framework we still use today, but now it's all grounded in the molecule of life itself, DNA.
And this brings us to the language we use today. We know that Mendel's particles are genes, and genes are just specific sections of DNA. An organism's entire genetic recipe is its genotype. But that's not the whole story. The thing that recipe actually builds, what you can see and measure, like your height or your eye color, that's the phenotype. And this is so important to remember. The genes are not some rigid, fixed blueprint. The environment you're in plays a huge part in how those genes get expressed. It's like someone might have genes that make them tend to be fat if they eat 5,000 calories a day, but that same person would tend to be thin on 2,000 calories. Same genotype, different environment, totally different phenotype. So, is the detective story over? Have we figured it all out? Not even close. The central idea of evolution by natural selection is one of the most solid, well-tested theories in all of science, for sure. But scientists are constantly finding new layers, new complexities. How genes talk to each other, how organisms literally change their own environments, all the intricate ways that life keeps adapting and changing. The detective story continues, and honestly, that's what makes it so amazing.